Thank you very much. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. Before I recognize myself for questioning, without objection, correspondence between our witnesses, Mr. Elias and Mr. Zielinski, and the Department of Justice in advance of their testimony today will be entered into the record. These letters establish the parameters in which they are allowed to testify. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Zielinski, you recommended a sentence of 7 to 9 years in prison for Roger Stone's felony crimes. Was your recommendation based on department guidelines?
Yes, it was.
And based on your 14 years at the department, did you believe that recommendation was warranted?
I want to correct you, Chairman. I have been at the department for just about, it'll be 6 years this November. But based on my experience, I did believe that the recommendation was warranted, yes.
But leadership at the department wanted a lower sentence. When you asked the department why they wanted a below-guideline sentence for Mr. Stone, you were told it was, quote, political and because the U.S. attorney was afraid of the president. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What did you understand that to mean?
I understood, as described in my written statement, to mean that political considerations were weighing in the U.S. Attorney's decision, and that the concern about the president was driving his decision-making process.
And what were you told could happen to you if you refused to go along with this lower recommendation?
We were told that we could be fired.
Now, you've described clearly that the department treated Roger Stone differently than any other defendant because of his relationship to President Trump. Is this against department policy?
It is.
And is it wrong?
It is.
Is it unethical?
It is.
You wrote in your written testimony that it pains you to describe these events. Can you explain why it pains you?
Mr. Chairman, I took an oath when I took this job, as did all of my colleagues who are assistant United States attorneys across the country. We are immensely proud of what we do. We are proud to serve in the Department of Justice, and we are proud that we prosecute without fear or favor. To describe an abdication of responsibility like this, and this sort of contradiction of all the reasons that we have taken these jobs is deeply painful to me.
Thank you. Mr. Elias, we just heard from Mr. Zielinski how the department violated its own policies just to appease the president's whims. In your testimony, you describe a similar pattern. Am I correct that the department also pursued antitrust investigations against the advice of career attorneys to satisfy the political and personal whims of President Trump and senior leadership at DOJ?
Yes, you are correct.
And do you believe these investigations are in the best interest of the American people?
I do not, no.
And in your opinion, should the department have prioritized investigations that benefited the American people instead of pursuing the Attorney General and President's political vendettas?
I think the department should be using its resources in a way that fulfills its mission, yes.
Mr. Iyer, I'd like to turn to you. You have decades of experience in public service at the highest levels of the Department of Justice. These witnesses confirm that the Attorney General is weaponizing government resources, taxpayer dollars, to pursue investigations that do not in any way benefit Americans, but instead advance the President's personal and political agenda. Briefly, what is the impact on our justice system if Barr is allowed to get away with this?
Well, let me just correct one thing. I don't really have decades. I really had a little over 1 decade, but nonetheless, to answer your question, I think the problem is that there's a finite number of resources to be spent to advance a whole lot of areas of our justice system. And so you're throwing money away, that's the first thing. But the more important thing is that by channeling enforcement efforts into inappropriate targets for the purpose, in some cases, of harassing people, which I think is often what we're dealing with, and also for channeling resources and spending time trying to give a special deal to other people, you're not only wasting money, but you're totally undermining public trust in the system. You're creating a situation, I think we're on the way to something far worse than Watergate, where you had a problem of public distrust because it's becoming very transparent that many things are being done essentially for reasons that are completely unrelated to the merits of the case.
Mr. Zielinski, you testified that you came forward because telling the truth still matters. I too believe the truth still matters, and we will not let this conduct stand. Attorney General Barr will be held accountable.
Our great senators. Hi, Chuck. He used to love me when I was a Democrat, you know.